But a lot of these principles that we find in nature can actually we find be applied to other things, to lots of other things.
Like feng shui.
Yeah, and actually, a lot of human interaction and things like that. Strangely, can also come into.
What does permaculture mean?
It comes from the word permanent agriculture,
Right.
but then got changed to permanent culture because of its ability to be applied to so many different things.
Right.
So it's the idea of thinking about permanence, instead of our sort of short-term gain, which is, the general sort of approach of a lot of humans, not all humans. But briefly here, what you've got to imagine is most of the school was literally completely bare. There was the odd tree dotted around and the main hedge at the beginning, but there wasn't much here to begin with. And for example, here it was just one big sort of flat field, and it was fenced off. The fence line there, I don't know if you can see the remaining of the fence there. And so this fence, it was just cutting off the area completely, and it just felt like, children, you will stay on the concrete, you will just look at the grass and not touch it.
There was a big thing with that. My son was here and they weren't allowed to go on the grass. How many people have grass on school grounds?
They have to have that special set activity. Okay, it's football time, you're allowed 1 hour on the grass now. And that was... No, they should be all the time on the grass and maybe 1 hour in the classroom. No, but it was just trying to, open up and just create that relationship in between the two. And
this was in 5 years. You've done it 5 years ago.
Yeah, so 5 years ago we came to that decision of removing this fence line.
There's a lot of bramble bushes and
yeah. And as you can imagine, we're on the top of the hill here. So one of the key design criteria here was how to encourage the children to use this area as much as possible, trying to get them out here and playing as much as possible. So one of the design criteria was to create a shelter belt, which is what we can see here. Is shelter something you've covered much at all?
A little.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, so essential for most of our sort of tender fruiting plants or vegetables is providing that shelter from the winds. Winds create more evaporation than sunshine does. So you lose more water from a wind than you will from a hot day quite often. It just takes moisture up. And here in this case it's trying to get just the kids out here, protecting them from that wind that makes it too cold.
Yeah.
Making them be able to use this field more. Multifunctional of course too, in that this shelter belt is of course a wildlife haven. And that was my favourite thing. Literally, I think a month after some of the first bits of grass stopped being cut and the first trees going in, loads of wildlife appearing. The first lizards, slow worms, the hedgehog that lived in this hedge all of a sudden decided that this is where he wanted to be, and there's actually his little path.
I was going to say, because we saw a hedgehog the other day on the street.
An alive one?
Yeah, a live one.
That's a rare thing to see nowadays, isn't it?
There was a building that builders moved into, and she might have been living there, or by the hospital, what they're doing up Elm Grove, sort of like.
So the hedgehog sort of lives in there, and he's got his own little track. You'll probably spot it if you look carefully enough. And he sort of comes cruising along and goes on a slug patrol and does all the slug eating that we need.
Slugs, they go for slugs.
Yeah, hedgehogs eat a lot of slugs and snails, so a fantastic animal to promote. Yeah, definitely one of our allies. So, shelter belts, briefly, you want a shelter belt to be slightly permeable, so it lets through a tiny bit of air. You don't want to cut off complete air, like when you create a wall, quite often you find that on the other side of the wall what you get is turbulent air. It's called eddies, and it actually becomes more turbulent by putting a fixed sort of barrier, and actually something slightly permeable like a sort of layered hedge, which is what we've got here, allows a bit of air through but not too much, and basically what it does is raises the wind. And normally the idea is for 1 time the height you've got 4 to 8 times that length in sort of clearing away from the effects of the wind. So this hedge is probably going as far as stopping the wind from hitting the school. probably will be reducing the electricity bills of the school, because another thing, you know, that increases our bills is the wind our buildings. Layered again, that idea of going from taller down to lower. Normally in a shelter belt you'd have it starting towards the side of the wind, so lower up to higher facing the wind, but you can have it vice versa and it's still nearly just as effective. That was because of the hedge, because of the fence line. I had to have the taller ones on the far side. Yeah, most of the wind is coming from the southwest, yeah. So notice the two pathways, there's two access pathways for the mower, and that is perpendicular to the wind. If I had, I mean, the normal temptation would be to have your entrance, because the tractor drives up, the normal temptation would be to have the pathway like this. So you imagine that would be just creating a wind tunnel.
It would, yes.
Okay, yeah, because the wind's coming from that direction.
Yeah, because that's where the wind's coming from. So you've got to have, if the wind's coming from this direction, you want to create your pathways perpendicular to your predominant wind. That's why the two pathways are at that 90-degree angle to the wind.
Yeah.
There's another one there for him to get up to the football pitch, yeah. So this whole shelter belt, I wasn't so preoccupied with going for native plants, although I was trying to promote wildlife. Actually, most of our wildlife are very adaptable. There's no doubt that native plants is what we should be looking at doing in most nature sort of orientated areas. But here the key function was providing that shelter belt first. And so you've got Italian alder, that's the one that has just gone flying up high, the tallest tree. A fantastic shelter belt tree. And the other fantastic thing about it is it's nitrogen fixing. So through its leaf fall and through its roots,
is it elder?
It's fixing alder with an A.
With an A, yeah.
Okay.
There's a few different alders. Three. There's the common English alder that likes really wet feet, so wouldn't be suitable for here. The Italian one that can cope with dry soils, which is the one I've got here. And then the red alder, which I'm actually getting quite excited about, because the red alder in theory could maybe coppice. You know, the art of coppicing, which you can cut down a tree and it'll grow back. So that could be really useful in sort of controlling the height of a shelter belt. No, it's slightly, I don't know what family it is, but it's not the leguminous family, but it does fix nitrogen, yeah, so it's quite exciting, that as well. You can use it also for growing mushrooms, so some of that coppice wood or cutwood can be used for that. Any wood is going to be good for biodiversity too, if you just leave it on the ground. Yeah. And a few other plants, the brooms. Eleagnus is a key plant. This plant here is probably one of the most permaculture plants I can think of, because it just does so many different things. You've seen it probably along most of our seafronts. It's quite often planted there because it's so wind tolerant.
Okay.
It's evergreen, so it provides that shelter belt effect in winter too.
Yeah.
It fixes nitrogen. Yeah, no, it's a fantastic nitrogen fixer. And also it's got a delicious berry. You need to have two varieties for pollination, but it does have a berry that's edible, and it's the first berry normally in the spring. It's one of the first ones, because you can see it now actually. It's flowering now.
And
so
the flowers are delicious, aren't
in
they?
the autumn.
Smell.
Yeah, and a beautiful smell to them. But the fruit, it's, again, like lots of fruits, the trick is getting it really ripe. A lot of people might try it when it's not ripe, when it's still slightly hard and it's quite astringent and quite, you know, you'll be pulling a funny face for a few seconds. But when you get it ripe, then it's really yummy. And of course, you can imagine, you can create really nice hedges with that. You can really create a good barrier.
There's loads in front of B&Q on the Lewis Road.
Yeah, B&Q, and on that seafront. On the seafront, there's loads.
It's used really widely in municipal planting because it's just so soft.
Yeah, I think the flowers aren't open just yet, otherwise it's got a really nice smell to them. Okay. Cherry plum, that's another fantastic tree to have in shelter belts. It's one of the best fruiting trees for an exposed site. making cherry plum jam recently, weren't you? They can get really sweet. Sometimes they're a bit sharp, but I like them.
Oh, sounds good.
And biting into that lemon.
Actually, that's what Alan was the Maori family.
Yeah, Mirabelle, yeah.
Yeah, that's the one that Alan had brought on the fruit thing. Alan, who's our secretary, our chairperson,
Okay.
has got an allotment open to him. He's got a complete round
Wow, that's fantastic.
a really nice little sheltered area, but it's a productive hedge. I wish I'd put those in. And actually, they'll cope with shortly as well.
Yeah, they don't mind much more. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
It's just a great plant for shelter bells.
You can get
just-
red ones too, can't you? Red leaf ones.
Yeah, which is really beautiful, aren't they?
Yeah.
It's really hard to spot the fruit actually, because the fruit's the same colour as the leaf, so you've got to really train your eye to spot them out. Initially in the design here, the idea was to have this whole area covered in a nice standard orchard, with a high branching out level canopy. But the council came along, and this is probably one of the biggest grounds for a school I've ever seen. And they calculated out that the 100 or so kids having an orchard here would restrict too much their movement. So we weren't allowed to have an orchard here. Which I still we've got a few orchards up at Stanley Park. Honestly, kids still run around there. So yeah, because you've got to put, I've got a few trees along the shelter on the edge. There's 5 or 6 trees. Some dwarf rootstocks, but raised the soil level raised with a tyre.
Yeah.
And because the tyre's like this, you've got to cut off that edge, if that makes sense. Which is the hardest bit, cutting through tyres is not easy. But it just creates a bit of extra sort of topsoil for that tree. And the idea is that it will provide seating so the kids can sort of sit here in the shade of a fruit tree, or in the shade of a tree, and be protected from that sunlight in summer kind of thing.
Great idea, yeah.
And nowadays with tyres, I know that growing food is, there's a few sort of things. With fruit it's not an issue, but if you're thinking of growing maybe leafy vegetables or something like that, or the potatoes is the famous one that's grown in tyres.
Yeah.
I don't know, I haven't read up enough about it to know, but in theory you're not meant to grow.
But
There's
it's
spuds
some
in it.
harmful chemical.
There's something
isn't
that's
there, in it?
leaks from the tyres. And the other thing I found out recently, that some schools want you to paint them white now because they can get quite hot in summer. But that's quite straightforward.
Hot.
I quite like the idea of sitting on something nice and warm.
I see what you mean, yeah, paint it white.
Yeah, the heat just gets held by the tyre kind of thing.
Sure. Okay.
Well, native cardoon, did I talk about, from the family of artichokes? They've also got edible flower heads. Before it becomes
flower heads.
Yeah. We've got nearly the
stage
heart. That's the same, just before they flower.
Right.
You can see I left a lot of these for the bees.
Yes.
And also in Italy, they're famously used for the rib of the leaf. So the leaf, down the centre of the leaf, that sort of fleshy bit, is used as a vegetable. They normally blanch the plant by tying it, surrounding it in some cardboard, and blanching it that way, and then harvesting the rib on a young plant, a 1 or 2 year old plant. These are perennial plants that live for a good 10, 20 years. So. But they're fantastic for bees. Once they're flowering, they're just drawing the pollinators a mile away.
So you try and have as many perennial birds as possible, really?
In general, I'd say that I always go for perennials for nearly all the time.
Right.
I mean, we'll talk a bit more about food growing.
Yeah.
It depends. If you've got time to put into growing annuals,
Sure.
then by all means, but it does take more time.
Yeah.
Once you've planted a perennial plant, it should keep on going for a fair few years depending on the plant. So it's all about, how much energy you can put into it. With schools, I find it quite often there's a teacher that's really enthusiastic, and one year she'll be really keen on growing some veg, and then the next year she's got a different post or has got to do something for PE or something, and it gets abandoned and doesn't get used, and so it collapses down a bit. So planting perennial plants just guarantees that, a fruit tree is going to give you fruit for 80, 100 years. So.
Sustainability, I suppose.
Yeah. And with a fruit tree, quite often it takes, 10 years for the plant to get big enough to start actually doing its thing. So it's about thinking actually. It's quite nice here actually. Every single child in the school planted 2 trees each when it came to planting this whole thing.
Fabulous.
Some of them planted fruit trees, and it was that conversation about actually you're maybe planting that for your little brother that will be coming here in a few years' time or something. And the usual thing that getting children involved normally means a bit less vandalism problems in the future. So because them and even the big brother will come along and oh no, my little brother planted that.
Yeah.
Okay, maybe I won't.
There's quite a lot of vandalism goes on
In this estate, there's a fair few problems with vandalism, but we've touched wood. We've been quite lucky here that I think because a lot of kids were involved with it, and they were so keen, getting the boys to push these huge big stones for the pond on big, round bits of wood, and they had to roll this big stone. There was a chance for them to show off as much as they wanted.
Yeah.
Really
At
feel,
the same time,
let their rareness go to a good use.
Yeah.
What is that then? Apple, is it?
That's an apple tree, yeah.
Okay,
there's-
and all those weeds around it.
I do need to come in and mulch that out. So I'll come and cut it down low, get some cardboard on top. Once I'm happy with it, I was thinking about maybe getting some strawberry plants as a ground cover. Because the strawberries don't take much nutriments at all, so it's on quite a dwarf rootstock, which I normally don't really like the dwarf rootstocks much. But in this
What's it
case,
on? Can you remember?
this one's M26 with that swelling in the base there.
Right.
M26 is, you just need to keep it staked and mulched for most of its life. Once it's bigger, it's probably alright. The dwarfer the rootstock, the more wimpy and fragile the plants are. And some of the big, strong roots. It creates a big tree, which is, sometimes not what people want. But a big rootstock means a big, strong tree that doesn't need so much TLCing and pampering.
The trouble is most of us garden on allotments, and you're
And
not
there's-
allowed these days any trees over 8 foot, which means really the biggest rootstock you can get is an M9.
What I'd recommend for allotments though is going for cordons.
Yeah, but
You
even
can get
those
quite a-
need to be on quite a dwarfing rootstock.
I'd go for M26 or M106, something fairly vigorous.
Would you?
Yeah, and not that 26 is that vigorous, but and because the whole idea of the cordon is you're taking out the vigour of the tree by leaning it sideways. So that takes away some of the vigour, ideally to go into fruit. But it also means, on chalky soil, it's pretty hard to find a good bit of topsoil in Brighton. So
I've actually got a step over espalier on M27s on chalk soil.
hey, and they're doing well.
They didn't do well this year, but usually they do.
This year's been crazy.
Mind you, I did put plenty of muck in.
Yeah, so they're
Yeah,
well fed
the
and
soil
happy.
was. Yeah.
So,
Yeah,